The most powerful emotion is fear. It will even kill love if you surrender to it. Every choice in life comes down to one decision, love or fear. Most people choose fear because they think it's easier. My name is Ed Garren'𝐬. I'm a family therapist. I have an office and a private practice in South Los Angeles. I was born in Tampa, Florida, grew up in the Tampa Bay area. If any of you have ever heard of the Bellamy brothers, I went to school with them. My father was the son of two Central European immigrants. His mother was a Roman Catholic mail order bride who had come out of the Roman Catholic orphanage system in Europe. They basically worked and starved those kids to death. If they survived till they were old enough, the boys were just turned out into the street. Good luck, kid. The girls were often sent as mail order brides to the United States just to, again, get rid of them. The United States has always been the dumping ground of virtually every country any of us have come from. So basically, our family came from orphans and bastards, which no one ever talked about. No one. Sorting through all that bullshit has been part of my life's work and finding out what actually happened. And the reason that's important is because my parents really had no idea how to rear children because they'd kind of had to rear themselves growing up. And it was obvious that I was a big sissy boy with glasses who couldn't play sports. Around age 8 or 9, my father started beating me. He actually confessed to me once in San Diego that he was afraid for me and he, quote, tried to beat it out of you, and I now realize that was the wrong thing to do. He was 40 when I was born. My mother was in her late 30s. They were both kind of tired. So I just had to bring myself up, and therefore I was very socially awkward. The kids made fun of me constantly. Gerber baby, Mrs. Garren, Jelly Belly. And so, I was the fat kid, geeky, with glasses who couldn't play sports. Nobody wanted to be seen with me. Nobody wanted to be my friend. It was a very, very lonely existence. And in that really lonely, painful childhood, I cried myself to sleep a lot, asking God, what did I do to deserve this? And, the answer I always got back was, you didn't do anything. I love you, and this will be over someday. I did have my very first car. I was working the lights for the school talent show one night, and one of my detractors opened the hood and poured a handful of sand down the oil pipe into the engine. So that's how I learned to rebuild automobile engines, because I couldn't afford to pay somebody to have it done. When I was 20, I almost attempted suicide. I got my car up to 100 miles an hour, took off the seatbelt, and I was going to drive straight into the end of a bridge. But I had this split-second flash of me in a wheelchair the rest of my life with a broken back, because the worst thing about attempting suicide is failing, but then having to live with the consequences of it. It wasn't that my parents were evil. They just didn't know anything about raising children because nobody had raised them. Well, maybe even before adolescence. My brother was learning how to do judo, and he brought home a couple of strength and health magazines, bodybuilders, because they had articles about judo in them. I would sneak into his room and look at the pictures, and I was hot for these bodybuilder guys. I didn't connect that with gay because no one ever talked about gay. I mean, gay didn't exist in terms of the common. People would talk about queers and fairies, and all this. I still kind of went on looking at guys, not connecting it with anything because there was no information. I look back on it now and realize there were a couple of guys who came like this close to seducing me, but they didn't either. There was absolutely nothing in the literature or in the talk. You'd hear stuff about queers and faggots and all this stuff. I graduated high school, went away to college, no sexual with anything. In my 20s, I met a woman who decided she was going to make me her next husband. But we started having sex. One night she said to me, Tony's going to come over tonight. He's bi. And the three of us got in bed, and I started kissing him, and this flood of emotions rolled out of me that was, on one hand, incredible, and on the other hand, scary as fuck. And Tony wanted to date me, but I was too scared. I felt like I had let this thing out of me that I was never going to let out again. I sort of started praying, like, God, I want you to kill this part of me. And in that moment, it clicked. My sexuality is not this thing on the outside of me. It's right here in the center of me. You got to remember, this is like 1975 in Tampa, Florida. I was going back to the University of South Florida. And later I came to realize the difference between being obvious and being out. Being obvious means you're showing people something that's sort of stereotypical and letting them define you. And I was like, no, I don't want that. I get to define me, and I get to say what defines me. I'm owning that. I'm claiming that power. And I'd already sort of come out of one emotional prison, and I certainly wasn't going to put myself into another one for the sake of supposed safety. I have nothing to be ashamed of. There's nothing wrong with me. And I'm not going to try to please the people who hate me so I can supposedly be safe, even though all of them kind of, they know what's going on. They're not saying anything. I really wanted to own the power of me, all of me. The other reason I came out and proud was because I was really pissed off about a decade of kissing I had missed. And I did. I mean, I came out with a vengeance. What I also realized was that white people have no experience of dealing with a bigger them that hates us, because we're the bigger them. So I thought, okay, I need to learn how to navigate this difference thing. And I'd always loved Black people, and I also had started knowing a lot of Jewish people. And I realized, these folks know how to get over. So I'd already read a lot of Maya Angelou and African American literature, and I started looking at it from the perspective of how do they survive in this very, very hostile environment that's out to get them. And it always came back to the same place. There's a choice between making everybody else happy first and the illusion of safety that it brings, or my happiness come first, my life, my spirit, my energy. And like I said, I already grew up in one prison. I sure as hell wasn't going to put myself in another one to try to make people happy who, the whole fit in thing and get along. I mean, yeah, it's important in terms of, socialization and all that. But when we have to start selling our soul to do it, not good. And that's one of the things I came to understand about my father. When you fight back, and win, they don't mess with you. So after I realized I was gay, my brother was in the military and was living in Massachusetts. He was dating a woman, and my parents were not thrilled with her. And I wrote him a letter to basically say, look, if you want to marry her, because I'm probably not going to get married or ever have any children. So if anybody's going to give him grandchildren, it's going to be you. Mailed it off to him in Massachusetts, not knowing, because we weren't very communicative internally. Part of it was that $1 a minute long distance call. My mother had taken off for vacation to go spend a week with him touring New England. And the letter arrived the same day she did. So he flips it to my mother and says, here, see what Ed has to say. She opens the letter. She starts reading it. And then I get this phone call from him, you've just taken 20 years off your mother's life, blah, 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 And I tell people all the time, look, most of us did not do this process easily. You're expecting your parents to? No, it's a process with them, and expect this reaction when you first tell them. If they love you, they'll get over it. If they don't get over it, you're better off without them, as much as that hurts. Anyway, now my mother knows. She comes back to Florida. She started reading books. She educated herself to where it was okay. think it was 77. We had Gay Pride Week at the University of South Florida, and we decided we put a small ad on Monday in the campus newspaper. On Friday, all gay people wear blue jeans. This is on a campus where like 90% of the students wear blue jeans. On Wednesday, we added the line, bisexuals wear cutoffs, cutoff jeans. Oh, God, people went ballistic. Friday comes along. There's actually straight guys wearing blue jeans with t-shirts hand painted. I'm wearing blue jeans, I'm wearing jeans, but I'm not gay or I'm not queer. I mean, just all this stuff. The next morning on Saturday on the Tampa Tribune, Section B, was an article about the event. And in the second paragraph, it said, others wore blue jeans because they are gay, like Ed Garren'𝐬, 27 of USF's Gay and Lesbian Coalition. Well, of course, this hits Dade City like a bomb. And my mother was off on vacation somewhere, so my father was home alone. And I thought, oh, shit, I got to tell him. I said, look, Papa, there's some news you may have heard, and, I don't want you to take it personally. I don't want you to feel bad about it. I just, and he stops me. He says, I already know what you're trying to tell me. I suspected it years ago. I don't want to know about the details. Because I don't really understand and don't want to understand. All I know are two things. You're my son and I love you. And something happened to you about a year ago. I always used to worry about you because you were like, you had no rudder in your life and you were just kind of lost and trying to find your way. And then suddenly that changed and you just became a person. You got direction in your life. You figured out what you needed to do and you started doing it. And if it's because of this, I can't argue with the results, but I really don't want to talk about it. And I'm just happy that you're happy. He worked hard to maintain a civil relationship with me in spite of the fact that I was his worst nightmare come true. He had a gay son who wanted the whole world to know it. So as soon as I graduated, I packed up with $75 and moved to Miami. I was young. I didn't realize I was hot. I look at pictures of me now and go like, oh God, I was a babe. But of course I felt fat and ugly because that's what self-esteem issues do. September of 1983, I packed up and moved to Los Angeles with $475, landed in West Hollywood the year before it became a city, was involved in the cityhood, was an officer in Stonewall Democratic Club. All 40 of the original city council candidates were interviewed in my living room on Curzon Street in West Hollywood by Stonewall Democratic Club. In those days, there were certain gyms. There was one in West Hollywood where all the models and porn stars and the hustler boys all worked out. I joined that one in 1985. We buried 117 members in 1 year because those guys were the first to get sick and die of AIDS. There was one guy I dated briefly named Rick Callista. He actually was in the middle of designing, he was an interior designer, Joan Rivers' house in Truesdale at the time. And I was his 10, he was my 10, and it was great for about 3 or 4 dates. And then he got sick from AIDS and broke it off and then called me up about 6 or 8 months later. He opened the door and he was this lesion-covered, almost skeleton. And I'll never forget, on his sofa, I was holding him and stroking him, and he's like, "Why are you doing this? I'm ugly." And I said, "Not to me, you know." And then he went in the hospital and died. He wouldn't let me come see him. And like I said, I was just watching all these beautiful guys shrivel up and shit themselves to death. It was horrible. A lot of them were the very guys that I was most attracted to. And I, in a sense, just gave up on sex other than with myself at that point, because none of the guys I wanted, they were too busy trying to survive to be interested in dating anybody. And around that same period, I met this doctor, 15 years older. And we went out to dinner. He took me to the infamous El Coyote on Beverly Boulevard. We went back to my place in West Hollywood, and he made a move. I was not attracted to him at all. And then I thought, wait a minute. I like this guy. He's smart. He's funny. There's nobody knocking down my door now. So what the hell? Let's see where it goes. And then I settled into a once a week sort of standing Friday night liaison with Alan for about 10 years that got me through the plague. And we would talk about all these people dying around us. And that was the genesis of the book that he wrote, AIDS and the Doctors of Death. I'm Greg on page 17. What happened because of AIDS was the pool of available men that I wanted to have sex with just evaporated and went away. There weren't a lot of guys I was interested in connecting with, and the few that there were already taken. When protease inhibitors finally came along in the early 90s, and the Lazarus effect, people literally came back from the dead. So in the 2000s, what happened was literally a new crop of young men started emerging. A lot of them. And I don't know if this is because I'm an older guy and I wouldn't have noticed this when I was a younger guy. A lot of them specifically want older men. They don't want somebody their age. And a part of me sometimes thinks, maybe these guys are the reincarnated spirits of all the guys who died back then. The problem with finding a steady lover, it's mostly me. There was a certain physical type that I really was like, I'm still attracted to. And that only clicked a couple of times in my life. And then in both situations, that person got scared and broke it off. In 2013, I met somebody and they lived out of town. And we met long distance near where they live. And so we ended up getting married. And 7 years. We got divorced a year and a half ago because when finally I just said, look, I can't give you sexually what you want. Go find somebody who can. He found somebody who loves him. And they're still together. In fact, they bought a house together. That was final about a year and a half ago. We're still friends. We still own our house together, but I live in it. And he's actually very glad because even though he didn't want to buy the house initially with the whole real estate thing in LA that he didn't understand at the time, he realizes, oh, fuck, I'm so glad that I have a connection to this piece of real estate. I told friends of mine, I said, I don't have anybody to leave it to, so whatever. Anyway, I enjoyed being with somebody. I'd like to meet somebody else that I could be with. I have this gift. I can see through people. And being that emotionally naked very quickly is very frightening for a lot of people. I have a large personality, and that's scary too. It's sort of like you're in the little MG convertible, and this 18-wheeler pulls up right, and like the top of the tire is here, and you're like, And I get that. What that also keeps away the people who don't really love me. If somebody really loves me, they're just going to jump in and do it. So I live one day at a time and try to meet people and see what happens.